The wind over Dust Creek always came before dawn, dragging with it the scent of juniper and ash. Mira Callahan felt it on her cheeks as she crouched beside the old cow, pressing her forehead to its warm flank. The animal shifted, uneasy, as if it too sensed something unsettled in the bones of the land. Mira whispered softly, calming it, her voice barely rising above the creak of wood and the whisper of morning breeze. Behind her, the faint shuffle of boots in the dirt marked Eli's presence. 14, sharp-eyed and restless. He was brushing down the horse, old Bramble, whose hip bones jutted like question marks beneath his faded coat. See that? Mira nodded toward the prints in the dust, just past the paddock. Coyote. Small one. Traveling east. Alone. Eli squinted. How can you tell it's alone? No drag marks from a pack, and its gait's too light to be running from anything. He studied the ground, then her face, a quiet pride blooming in his eyes. You used to track for real, didn't you? I used to do a lot of things, she replied, standing slowly, wiping her hands on her skirt. Now I milk cows and bake dry bread. Come help me with the saddle. They worked side by side in a rhythm that came only from years of struggle, of fending off the slow death of isolation with routines that barely held the silence back. The sun crept higher, painting the red hills gold. Crows gathered on the ridge like shadows that hadn't yet decided what to be. Eli was mid-laugh when they heard it, gunshots. Distant, but too close for comfort. They froze. Then another sound, hooves. Hard, fast. Dust rose from the west like a warning in motion. Myra's breath caught. Inside. Now, she said, but Eli didn't move. He stood, fists clenched, watching the approaching figures, 5 riders in dark coats, long shadows under their hats. One of them raised a hand, and the other slowed, fanning out like a hunting party closing in. The lead man rode a black gelding and bore a scar that ran from the corner of his eye to the edge of his neck. Duke Crowder. Mira recognized him at once. He hadn't changed much since she'd seen him last, in court, lying under oath, laughing while men hanged for what he'd done. Mornin', Miss Callahan, Duke drawled, spitting into the dust. Ain't it a fine one? You've got no business here, Mira said calmly, pulling Eli behind her. Oh, I beg to differ. See, your late husband borrowed a fair amount from us. Never paid up. So we've come to collect. That's a lie. Duke pulled a crumpled paper from his coat and tossed it toward her. Debt's all written down, with his name and mark. Real legal. Mira didn't touch the paper. Even if that's true, we've nothing left to give. Duke's eyes slid toward the cow. Then the horse. Well now, I wouldn't say that. 2 of his men dismounted. Eli stepped forward, hands balled into fists. Mira grabbed his arm firm. Don't. But he was shaking, barely holding in the fury. They're lying, Ma. Pa never borrowed a damn cent from. A backhand from one outlaw sent him sprawling. Mira lunged, but Duke caught her arm and twisted it hard behind her. Now, we don't need a scene. You touch him again, and I swear, she snarled, but they laughed. You'll what? Duke smirked. Milk us to death. The cow screamed as one of the outlaws tugged it away by the halter. Bramble reared as another yanked the reins. Eli scrambled to his feet and ran toward them, wild with rage. The man who struck him before turned, too slow. Eli tackled him to the ground. Mira screamed. The others reacted instantly, boots pounding, fists flying. Eli was pulled off and slammed against a tree near the porch, coughing blood. Then Duke pulled out the rope. No, Mira whispered. No, he's just a boy. He drew first blood. That's outlaw justice, Duke said flatly, tying the knot with methodical ease. That's how your husband wanted it. They threw the rope over the old branch. Mira clawed and kicked, but was held down by 2 men as Duke tightened the noose around Eli's neck. I'll kill you, she shrieked. Every one of you. Get her eyes, one of them said. Make her watch. The world blurred. The sky tilted. She heard Eli's last word, asterisk mama, asterisk, just before his boots kicked and then hung still. The only sound left was the creak of old wood and the wind gathering in the pines. The men left her there. They didn't untie the rope, Didn't bury him. Didn't even take the paper back. By dusk, the light had turned to rust. The cow was gone. So was Bramble, and her son swung gently in the warm breeze, lit gold by the dying sun. She hadn't moved in hours. Her fingers trembled now, brushing dirt from a small tin sheet hidden under the porch. Inside it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a blade. Not clean, not sharp, but familiar. She took it out, set it beside the fire. Her eyes were dry. When the first thunder rolled across the hills, she didn't look up. She only began to scrape the blade against the whetstone, slow and steady, sparks whispering into the darkness. And in the clouds above, the hawks still circled. A week passed before anyone realized the widow was gone. The Callahan ranch stood silent under a bruised sky, its doors hanging open, curtains fluttering like abandoned ghosts. No smoke curled from the chimney. No livestock grazed. Just the slow creak of the porch swing moving in the wind, as if someone had recently risen from it. The boy still hung from the tree. Sheriff Calder ordered his body cut down that morning. Word spread through Dust Creek by sundown. Some said she'd taken poison. Others swore she'd walked into the desert barefoot, wearing only her dead husband's coat and a butcher's apron. But no one had seen her leave, and no one had dared go looking. She lost her mind, muttered the barkeep at the Horned Mule. Ain't no woman stays whole after watching her boy swing like that. Ain't no woman stays, period, replied Eustace, the blacksmith, setting down his ale. Place was cursed long before she got there. Sheriff Calder didn't care for curses. He rode to the ranch on the second evening alone, with his badge covered in dust and his horse anxious beneath him. Something felt wrong, like walking into a church where all the pews faced the wrong way. Inside the house, everything was undisturbed, except for a line of white chalk drawn across the floorboards, separating the hearth from the rest of the room. At first, Calder thought it childish, until he saw the symbols carved into the wood just beneath, a spiral of circles and crosshatches, patterns he'd once seen etched into Comanche burial stones. In the kitchen, beneath a loose floorboard, he found knives. Not kitchen blades, but curved hunting steel. Some rusted, some honed to a shine. Wrapped in oilcloth and tied with rawhide, there were feathers, bones, bits of dried plants he couldn't name. Outside, tracks led nowhere. Just impressions that started 10 feet from the back door and ended 2 steps later, as though the earth had swallowed her whole. Calder lit a cigarette with shaking hands. The wind had picked up again. He didn't stay the night. For nights later, in the Red Canyon west of Sable Pass, a rider named Jude was found by a merchant wagon, or what was left of him. His horse stood tied to a scrub pine, reins looped neatly. Jude's body lay on the rocks nearby, cut up bad, stripped to the waist, pants soaked in blood, chest carved with deep slashes, too deliberate to be an animal. Across his stomach, flayed clean and burned into the flesh, was a name, Eli. The merchant vomited on the trail and rode 2 hours back to the mining camp to report it. By dusk, word had reached Duke Crowder. Hell, Duke muttered, dragging on his cigar. Must have been the Mexicans. We shot up a couple o' their cousins last spring. Laughter spread through the campfire, brittle and short. She's dead, said Lem, the youngest of the crew. Everyone says so. You believe everything folks say? Duke replied, exhaling smoke through his nose. She was just a woman, said Briggs, a hulking brute with yellow teeth. Ain't no woman done this. But 3 days later, Briggs was dead too. They found him floating face up in the trough behind Cooper's saloon in Hartlow. His eyes were gone. Not gouged, asterisk on asterisk, clean as boiled eggs. The water around him was black with blood and something else, a thick oil slick that smelled of burnt sage and old rot. The undertaker who pulled him out claimed he'd seen something like it during the war, when the scouts came back mutilated by the desert tribes. The preacher insisted it was witchcraft. Sheriff Calder came down from Dust Creek that very night. He stood over Briggs' body, watching the flies, the horsehair twine knotted around his wrists and ankles. His hat was pulled low, but the lines in his face had deepened since the Callahan boy died. It's her, someone whispered behind him. He didn't turn. Back in Dust Creek, folks began to talk. They said the widow didn't die, that she'd gone back to her old life. that she'd once hunted men across the Mexican border with nothing but a knife and a piece of charcoal for tracking, that she spoke in tongues when she was angry, that her mother had been a midwife who birthed babies with no eyes, and her father a scout who could vanish into rock. Children were told not to play near the Callahan ranch. The postman stopped delivering letters out that way. At night, riders swore they heard weeping in the mesquite trees. Once, a cowhand claimed he saw a shape standing on the ridge, tall, shrouded in black, with something long and sharp hanging from her hand. In the canyons, the gang grew jumpy. Duke barked orders, but the men drank more, slept less. One swore he saw Jude's ghost grinning in the firelight. Another packed his things and rode east, saying nothing. Lem begged to be let go, said his sister was birthing twins, and he needed to be there. Duke laughed, then shot his horse out from under him and said, "You ain't leaving until she shows her face." But she never did. Just wind and silence. And the next morning, one of their traps was sprung. What they found inside wasn't an animal. It was a length of rope, coiled like a noose, with a dead crow hung in its loop. By then, they were barely sleeping. Duke stopped lighting fires. He ordered shifts through the night. But whatever hunted them didn't need fire to see, didn't need tracks to follow. Only once did anyone claim to glimpse her. It was a drifter who came down through Sable Pass on foot, said he saw a figure wrapped in deer hide, face covered in charcoal and ash, crouched beside a creek sharpening something. She didn't move, he whispered in the tavern. Just looked at me. I don't think she blinked. I don't think she had to. By the time he finished telling it, 2 men had left their drinks unfinished and ridden north. The desert grew quieter. People stopped asking questions. And somewhere out beyond Dust Creek, the hawk circled again, patient, eternal, waiting for the blood to fall. Long before Mira Callahan bore that name, before she wore a widow's shawl or cradled a baby boy in trembling arms, she was known by another name, Whisper Trace. Riders, outlaws, and bounty men west of El Paso once spoke it with a mix of awe and dread, because when she was tracking you, you didn't hear her coming. You just stopped breathing. Her father, a Comanche scout turned army turncoat, taught her to listen to dust. "It talks if you kneel low enough," he'd say, crouching with his ear to the earth. Her mother, a sharp-tongued Irish midwife, taught her pain, how to bear it, how to hide it, and when to turn it into fire. By 18, Mira had tracked murderers across the Badlands, crept through border towns with a bloodied rifle on her back, and vanished into arroyos like smoke. She gave it all up the day Eli was born, buried her knives, burned the last wanted poster with her name scrawled in scarlet, and swore to God and dust she'd never kill again. But the desert keeps what you leave behind. Now, as stars pressed against the bruised velvet of the sky, Mira lay prone across a ledge of broken stone, staring down into the outlaw camp nestled in a bowl of rock and scrub. She counted 4 of them left. The 5th lay buried a mile east, his chest flayed open beneath a cairn of sharp stones. His name had been Jeb. She hadn't spoken his name aloud. Below, the gang laughed and drank beside a dying fire. Their stolen supplies, her cow, her saddle, her husband's old hunting bag, lay scattered like plundered offerings. One of them pissed into a barrel meant for water. Another wiped his mouth and leaned against the pack mule. Myra's jaw tightened. She moved like wind over rock, descending soundlessly. A coyote watched her from a distance, then padded into the shadows, respectful. By the time she reached the edge of the camp, they were asleep, drunk or dreaming. She crept to the barrels first, uncorking each, sprinkling crushed desert bloom and powdered root into their water. She'd learned from her mother which herbs made a man bleed inside without a sound. Then she struck the fire, not with kindling, but with dried sage wrapped around a fuse soaked in lamp oil. She lit it and placed it under their blanket pile, then backed into the dark. Flames swallowed the camp before the second man screamed. She watched them scramble, half-naked, smoke pouring into their throats. 2 barrels cracked open, releasing fouled water. The mule tore loose and ran into the night. One outlaw, Lem, grabbed a rifle and wheeled in circles, coughing and firing into shadows. Mira waited until dawn before dragging him from the rocks. He was the youngest. His boots were too clean. He cried like he was still someone's son. I didn't want to hang him. Lem sobbed, blood caking his temple. I just held the rope. That's all. Mira didn't speak. She pinned him to the ground with her knees and carved 4 words into his chest with the edge of her old blade. I remember Eli. Then she wrapped his wound, tied his hands, and left him near a trail. He would live. He would carry the name. By noon, Sheriff Calder stood over that same boy, squinting beneath his hat. He'd found the lad by accident, following tracks so faint they might have been imagined. Lem was barely breathing, but managed to whisper through cracked lips. She's a ghost, but real. She never blinks. Calder didn't reply. He knelt beside the boy and examined the carvings. The knife had been honed sharp, surgical almost. Not the work of madness, discipline, precision. He followed her trail another hour, deep into the canyon, until it simply stopped. The tracks were clean one moment, then gone the next. Not washed away, not obscured. Just gone. He found a piece of animal hide tied to a mesquite branch. On it, inked in charcoal, were the outlines of 5 faces. 4 crossed out. He stared at it a long while before mounting his horse and turning back. That night, the remaining gang huddled in silence. Duke Crowder didn't sleep. He stared into the fire and fingered the barrel of his gun, like a priest toying with a rosary. She's not human, muttered Connors, his voice cracking. She's just a bitch with a knife. Duke snapped. You want to curl up like some scared dog, go ahead. I ain't afraid of shadows. But when Connors went for water, he vomited black. His lips bled. The poison had settled in his gut. He begged Duke to end it. Duke handed him the pistol, but Connors was too weak to lift it. The last thing he saw before death was Duke walking away. Later that night, the wind howled through the canyon like a mother mourning something sacred. Mira watched from the ridge, wrapped in a shawl of oiled leather and dust. Her hair was braided back now, hands gloved, her body tighter, leaner, wound like wire. She didn't feel guilt. She felt memory. The way Eli used to grip her hand too tight when he was nervous. The way his hair always stuck to his forehead after riding Bramble. The way his voice cracked when he tried to yell like a man. She touched the hilt of her blade, steady now, and whispered something into the desert wind, words her father once taught her to say before drawing blood. The wind replied with silence. It was enough. The canyon walls pressed close like old, angry gods. Shadows loomed tall where the red rocks split into a crooked pass, and at the highest ledge, just below the lip of stone that overlooked the valley, the last 3 outlaws made camp. Their fire burned low, more smoke than flame, and the heat did little to quiet the chill that had settled into their bones. Duke Crowder sat with his back to the stone, staring at nothing, gun cradled across his lap. He hadn't slept in 2 days. His eyes were bloodshot, sunken deep in a face that had once sneered with ease, but now looked carved from gristle and guilt. The others weren't much better. Lem hadn't spoken since sundown. His chest was still bandaged from where she'd left her message. Every time he shifted, he winced, and every time he winced, the others flinched like a shot had gone off. They spoke in murmurs now, if at all. Their world had shrunk to firelight in fear. She ain't a woman, whispered Connors, scratching at his neck like he was trying to pull the fear out. She's a curse. Shut up, Duke muttered. It's just a trick. She's flesh, and flesh can bleed. But even as he said it, his fingers trembled around the stock of the revolver. Then came the scent, sickly sweet and sharp, like burned sage, and something oily beneath it. Connors rose first, eyes darting. Lem pulled his pistol and stumbled into the dark, swearing he saw something moving between the rocks. A hiss, low and unnatural, followed by a dull thump, and suddenly smoke billowed from behind their crates. Lem screamed, not from pain, but from panic. She's here. Then came the arrows, black-feathered and silent, slicing through the haze. One struck Connors in the thigh. He fell, firing wildly, a round catching Lem square in the back. Blood sprayed across the canyon wall as Lem collapsed, twitching, gasping through a mouthful of dust. Connors screamed, clutching his leg, eyes wide in disbelief. Duke didn't move. He stayed pressed against the stone, the rope now clutched in his hand instead of the gun. The same rope they'd used on the Callahan boy. He'd kept it like a trophy. Now it felt heavier than iron. Smoke curled around him, lit silver by the dying coals. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoed across the ledge. He looked up. She stood at the mouth of the cave, framed by darkness, blade in one hand, bow in the other, a shawl of ash-colored hide draped across her shoulders. Her face was half covered in charcoal paint, but he recognized the eyes. He'd seen them once before, wide and hollow, staring up from the dirt as her son swung above her. "Mira," he breathed. She didn't answer, just stepped inside, silent as a prayer. Connor scrambled backward, gasping. "I didn't kill him. I didn't touch the rope. Mira loosed a second arrow. It struck just beside his ear, embedding in the wall. He fainted. Now it was just Duke and her. The lantern between them flickered with each heartbeat. "Why?" he asked, voice cracking. "You had a life. A boy. You could have started over." Her voice, when it came, was steady and low. "You made sure I couldn't." He tried to smile, but it came out a grimace. "It was just business. We've done worse. Hell, your husband wasn't clean either." She stepped forward, blade catching the lantern light. "Don't talk about him. Don't talk about my son." Duke raised the rope like a ward. "You think this matters to me? I'll face the noose. I ain't afraid to die." She stopped a few feet from him and tossed something at his feet, a folded piece of fabric. He picked it up with trembling fingers. Eli's shirt, still stained at the collar with old blood. Duke looked up, and for the first time, he truly saw her. Not just a widow, not a ghost, but something forged. Something made in fire and buried grief. "I wanted to die after that day," she said. "I buried him with my own hands. No marker. No him. Just me and the dust. Then I remembered what I used to be. Who I was before love softened me." She held out the rope. He didn't reach for it. "You hang yourself," she said, "with the same rope, or I take you apart 1 inch at a time." Duke stared at the rope, then at her. He tried to laugh, but the sound died in his throat. He turned to the rafters of the cave, found a beam, tied the knot with shaking hands. Mira watched him climb the crate, watched him loop the rope over and slip it around his neck. He looked back once, for mercy or understanding. He found neither. He stepped off. The body twitched once, then hung still. Outside, the wind howled again, rising through the canyon like a warning to anything that still breathed. Mira walked past Connors, who was sobbing quietly in the dust. She didn't look at him, didn't speak. Her left leg dragged slightly, blood soaking through her boot, but she moved with purpose, each step measured. She descended the ledge slowly, gripping the rock with a bloodied hand. At the bottom, the sky had turned violet. Thunder rolled somewhere far away. She didn't look back. Dust Creek didn't appear on most maps anymore. Whatever was left of the town clung to the edge of the desert like an old scar, worn, half forgotten, and stinging only when the wind changed. The buildings leaned like drunks against each other, paint stripped, windows dark. Even the church bell had fallen from its steeple, now resting in weeds, with a dent from some long-ago storm. A stranger rode in near dusk, boots coated in red clay, coat trailing behind him like a shadow. He wore no star on his chest, yet moved like a man used to silence and danger. His eyes, sharp and storm-colored, scanned every porch and shutter. He paused outside the saloon, dismounted, and pushed through the swinging doors like the air itself parted for him. Inside, only 3 men nursed drinks. One was asleep. One didn't look up. The third was old, wiry, with a beard the color of smoke and fingers, yellowed from years of rolling his own tobacco. The stranger walked to the bar, tapped twice, and waited. The old man nodded toward the bottle. "Ain't no barkeep. Pour it yourself." The stranger did, then turned, leaning his back against the counter. "I'm looking for a story," he said, quiet but clear. "Something that happened here 10 years back. A woman, her son." The room stilled. Even the man pretending to sleep cracked an eye. "What kind of story you after?" the old-timer asked. "The kind folks whisper about. The kind that leaves ghosts." The old man took a long pull from his glass, then set it down slow. "She wasn't no ghost," he said. "She was his mother." Silence folded in around the words. The stranger nodded once. That's what I heard. She came from the dirt. The old man went on, voice dry as sagebrush. Walked it like it owed her something. And maybe it did. They hanged her boy on a branch near the house. Took her animals. Took her peace. Thought she'd break. But she didn't break. She disappeared. And came back, the stranger said. The old man smiled with no joy. Came back with knives older than sin and a heart carved hollow. The Crowder gang didn't see her coming. Thought she was wind. Or vengeance. Only one of them lived. Lem, the stranger said. The one she marked. The old man's eyes glinted. You his boy. The stranger nodded slowly. He told me stories. Only ever one name he spoke with fear. What happened to him? Died last year. Couldn't outrun the fever. He tapped the hilt of the knife at his belt. An old thing, bone-handled, worn smooth by time. He left me this. Said she gave it to him after carving her son's name into his chest. The saloon fell quiet again, save for the creak of the floorboards in the wind. You looking for her? The old man asked, voice gentler now. No, the stranger said. Just wanted to see the place. Dust Creek, where it all ended. The old man shook his head. No, son. It didn't end here. It started. Out past town, the Callahan ranch was a skeleton. The house had collapsed in on itself, devoured by wind and weather. The barn was just ribs of timber. But the tree still stood, dead now brittle. But its branches reached the sky like accusing fingers. Beside it a stump. Carved deep into the wood were 5 names. Faint, weather-worn, but still legible. Each belonged to a dead man. Outlaws. The names had been slashed through. Except one. One name circled in red-stained groove, Eli. The stranger stood there for a long time, the wind tugging at his coat, dust rising around his boots. Then he knelt, touched the name with 2 fingers, and whispered something too soft for even the canyon to carry. When he rose, he left the knife, Myra's blade, buried in the stump, the handle catching the last light of day like a beacon or a gravestone. They say vengeance ends with death, but hers, it birthed something else. Justice, fear, legacy.